I always say, Tom Cruise bought my first house.
Mike, you were involved in one of the highest script sales in history. You have to tell us the story.
Well, it's actually a story that continues to this day. It was this script that my former writing partner and I wrote called Steinbeck's Point of View. And we had kind of found our groove, found our voice. We had written a script called Dragonfly before that, and we'd started to figure out, who we were as writers. And so we were just looking for concepts that were compelling to us. And sitting in his backyard one day, I just had this notion of corn growing up out of the ground. And what if it brought something with it, and something hidden, if you will? That led to a discussion. Well, how could that be? How could we find a way into emotion? And that led to the notion of, well, what if it was a plane crash had crashed into that earth, and then way later this crop came up out of the ruins of the plane crash and brought with it the remnants of the people that had been on that plane. Seemed like a really interesting way into an exploration of grief and of humanity through the props that each of us carries with us. And uniquely on an airplane, one person was taking an engagement ring to go propose marriage to someone. One person had a camera roll full of film of an incredible journey they'd been on, and so on and so forth. So that led to this script we wrote, and we had to find a sort of heroic way in. And so we came up with this character that was sort of a very sort of used car salesman, real estate guy, very flashy guy, confident guy, who suddenly has his world crash down when he finds out he has terminal cancer. And rather than take that head on, he tends to avoid it, ignore it, and eventually he becomes a little bit delusional and comes to believe through some sort of magical moments that the vineyard where it's not corn, it goes with it, we changed it to grapes, and that the yield of those grapes will be the cure to his disease. So he's totally selfishly motivated to cure himself. But in so doing, all of these remnants of lives come up, and he returns them to the various surviving family members and goes on this journey that sort of transforms him as a person, so that by the end of the movie, he comes to realize it was never about him, and it was never about his cure. It was about finding peace for all of these people who'd lost someone on that plane. So it was a very spiritual drama, if you will. And we went to a producer that we had just done Dragonfly with, Mark Johnson, who was an Academy Award winner for Rain Man, very talented producer. And back in those days, and the one thing I forgot to mention was that we were somewhat bullish about trying to rise up the ladder. And what we had discovered from our years of working for big producers and observing the business was, if you could sell scripts and sort of stack them, if you will, you could then have the audacity, as we did, to just simply attach yourselves as producer or director. And so that's what we decided to do. And we attached ourselves as producer and director on the script, and we gave it to Mark Johnson, and then he took it into all the studios. And to our delight, we were immediately met with, we love it. There was 2 or 3 studios that wanted to bid on it, but the universal response was, but you're not directing it. And the reason for that was that, they want a big movie star to play this role. And most big movie stars are not usually inclined to work with first-time directors. So they felt like they would be shooting themselves in the foot by even, entertaining this. And so, but we held firm. And I don't know where we came up with the audacity to do so back in those days, but it was just youthful oblivion, I think. And so then Warner Brothers came in and they said, all right, we'll make a deal. We'll buy the script and we'll give you a list of 10 movie stars, Brad Pitt, John Travolta, Tom Cruise, all the guys you would imagine back in those days. And if you can get one of them to commit to the movie in a year's time or whatever it was, then you can direct the movie. And if you fail to do that, then you agree to step off and let us get a director who can get one of those actors. And so that was a compromise that felt fair to us and probably felt like about the only thing we were going to get. And so we agreed to that. And so a deal was struck. And I think it was a pretty good deal. It was like, I think $750,000 up front against like $1.25 million back end. And so for the script, I don't even remember. I think the producing and directing fees were minimal because it's a privilege to even be in that position, and they don't pay you much for it. They just say, you're welcome. And so there we were. We had set it up at Warner Brothers, and we were thrilled to have the opportunity. But what we didn't realize was that the producer, the late Steve Ruther, who produced Pretty Woman and passed away a few years back, he was very excited to get going. And so without even informing us, somehow the script got to Tom Cruise. And it's not hard to imagine how that happened. The agencies all get their hands on everything, especially a high-profile sale and whatnot as soon as it goes out. And so Tom Cruise expressed an immediate interest. And so now the studio was thrilled and overjoyed that the biggest movie star in the world at the time, I think he was coming off Jerry Maguire and some other stuff, that he wanted to do this movie. And they were stuck with this conundrum of, and of course Tom Cruise would not do that with a first-time director. So it would require us to get off in the director chair. And so when they asked us to do that, we were a little bit surprised because we didn't even know that they had been submitting the script out. And so on the one hand, we were overjoyed that Tom Cruise was interested in doing our movie. But on the other hand, again, this absurd youthful audacity, we felt as though we were in a position of leverage suddenly. And so sure enough, we were able to renegotiate and to step out of the directing chair. And I think then the deal went to $2 million against $4 million or something like that for that script. And then they sweetened it with a blind deal, which means a put picture that we would direct and produce. So they sort of were giving us that opportunity, but just on a different movie that they were then paying for. And so at some point, I think, then it got to about $8.5 million. And that's what Variety wrote about it. I think the headline was "Right Men Can Jump" or something like that. And but then shortly thereafter, we pitched another movie to the same producer, the same studio, to direct and produce as well. And they bought that one as well. So we just kind of viewed it as a 3-picture deal, if you will, that was for like $10.5 million if everything got made. Now, of course, the difference between guaranteed money and back-end money is that in order to get the back-end money, you have to actually roll camera. You have to be making the movie. And so a whole bunch of weird things went on with that movie over the years. Of course, Tom Cruise fell out at some point and went and did some other movie. We did a number of rewrites with him and worked with him a little bit, which was surreal, as you might imagine, sitting in rooms with a giant movie star like that and watching him act out the part. We did a table read where he brought in some of his actor friends and everybody sat around in the living room and just did a table read of the script. And so it was pretty thrilling stuff for young guys. But then we saw the other side of the coin, which was that sometimes things are too good to be true. And that project went on to then at one point have George Clooney interested, and he was dabbling with the script himself. And then at another point, Richard Gere was attached to do it, and then 9/11 happened, and they felt like a plane crash movie was too sensitive, so it literally went quiet for years. At another point, Denzel Washington was attached to star in it with John Cassavetes' son directing as well. And so we were just watching this odyssey happen, and then two of the strangest things happened. At one point, it was dead and dormant, and we got a call from Joel Silver, who's a big action producer, Die Hard and movies like that. And he was, I guess, tasked with going through the Warner Brothers library and finding movies that were sitting on a shelf and trying to figure out if there was a way to bring them back to life. And so his idea was, how can we turn this into a horror movie? And so we entertained that for a minute and tried to come up with a way to turn it into a horror movie. Then we eventually just felt absurd and said, we can't figure this out. Good luck with it. Then I remember one day we got a call from our agent saying, would you entertain a call from Garth Brooks? And I was like, the biggest selling country artist of all time? Yes. He's read your script, Steinbeck's point of view, and he has some thoughts about it. So Garth Brooks called, and we talked to him for about an hour, and he had some notions about the script which were interesting, and I'm not sure where or what he planned to do with it. But anyways, this odyssey has gone on such that even, I think, a year or two ago, and this was sold in like 1998 or something, a year or two ago, I heard that Sam Raimi, the director, was developing it as well. So it's just been this odyssey of the movie that has had so many close calls, been on the finish line, and just never quite gone over. And it'll be interesting to see if it ever get made. It's a somewhat timeless story, so it I suppose could be made, but there's a lot of money against it. At this point, they've hired other writers to rewrite us. They've brought us to rewrite the other writers that rewrote us. They've paid development and holding fees and deals for actors and directors and what have you. So it has millions of dollars against it. And so either the studio would have to absorb all of that in whatever budget that the movie got made with, or if some other studio wanted to take it and turn around, they'd have to pay all those millions and millions of dollars that are against it. So it's just been the craziest journey you can imagine, but it was certainly a thrill ride for a while there in the beginning.
So it's almost like you have this winning lottery ticket that's been in your back pocket for 20 years, and sometimes the numbers match, and sometimes they don't.
Well, I tell you, it's at this point it's more of a story than anything else. I always say, Tom Cruise bought my first house, and that was the functional aspect of it back then, and it certainly launched our career and to bigger and better things. But now it's just become sort of a fascination that it still lives and still exists, and it's interesting too because I've grown a great deal as a writer since then. I would like to think I've honed my skills and become a much better writer. So when I go back and read the script, I think to myself, oh my goodness, I could do so much better than this. But at the time, it had its moment where it resonated with people for whatever reason.
Well, you could plug it into so many sort of genres. You could do faith-based.
Yep.
But I realize that it has some baggage attached in terms of dollar signs and things.
Right.
So many questions. A lot you already answered. But why did Hollywood want this script so badly?
Well, I think the initial response, look, once Tom Cruise said he wanted to do the movie, that's why Hollywood wanted it so badly. Because not only does Tom Cruise guarantee producers and studio executives a shot at a huge hit, he provides an opportunity for Oscar potential. He's the full package. And so then they also know that a guy like him piques the interest of every other actor at his level. They're constantly swooping in and taking each other's roles. That if somebody becomes unavailable, then then Brad Pitt comes in and takes that role, or what have you. So they know that once you have that interest of a Tom Cruise, that suddenly you should be able to cast it. And that's what's so fascinating is they had all those bites at the apple, and for one reason or another, it just never kind of came to fruition. It's very strange. But in terms of the original concept, I think it was. It was reminiscent to people of movies like Field of Dreams, where there was just a magical, bucolic quality to it that it hopefully inspired and had a sense of wonder, and it was pretty original. The idea that engagement rings are coming up out of the ground from a plane crash on a grape crop yield, and that a man stricken with cancer was discovering these things in his obsession to cure himself. Pretty weird stuff, but if you hold it all together and find a way to make it sort of synergistically work, which enough people I guess thought we did, then I think that was a big part of it. It had the familiarity of A Field of Dreams and that inspiring, hopeful quality, but it had a lot of originality to it that was pretty fresh, I guess, at the time. I mean, it's just a journey of discovery as a screenwriter, right? Like, I remember the first script that I ever sold was for like $125,000, and it was because my boss, who I was an assistant at the time, I gave him the script because I wanted his help at maybe getting an agent. And to my shock, he walked in the next morning and said, "I like your script. I think I'm gonna buy it." And he made one phone call to Joe Roth, that was the head of Disney at the time. I placed the call for him, and sure enough, they had a conversation that I wasn't privy to, and the next thing I know, Disney bought the script. And what I later concluded was, I was kind of a long in the tooth for an assistant at that point. I was 25, and I think my boss kind of wanted to move me out, and that this was actually just an excuse that he gave to be able to do that, and called in a favor with an old buddy. And to this day, I think that's actually what that was. But it didn't matter because we were on our way, right? Once you get behind the secret knock to the door, you're in, and you have that confidence. Okay, this can be done, right? And now let's try and do it again. And so we had a couple more bites at the apple at that level. We sold this silly comedy to Paramount, and we were still fumbling in the dark, trying to find our voice, trying to figure out, who are we? What are we trying to say? What do we want to make movies about? We were at that point, I think, kind of just attempting to sell scripts and attempting to get a foot in the door and be viable in some way in this movie business that we had both watched as spectators while working for big producers and seeing how it worked. We still hadn't quite become writers with a voice, if you will. And so when we got to the point of selling Steinbeck's Point of View, I'd say we were just at that point, we had sold Dragonfly, and it was sort of moving through the chain of development, finding a director, finding a star to get made, all of that. So by the time we sold Dragonfly, I think we were just, Steinbeck's, we were just delighted to have actually pulled off the heist of saying that we were producer and director and getting away with it. That we'd actually had a proof of concept, if you will, that is a workable approach to rising in the ranks, is to use and exploit your own material and the success of it to propel yourself upward, up the ladder and up the ranks. So, and then of course, when Tom Cruise came around, that was amazing. But as it started to sort of fall apart and not come to fruition, we were already sort of on to other things. And at that point, we were just sort of looking at it with amazement that something could be so close and so big and yet still not come to fruition. And that's a lesson that I take with me to this day. I have projects with some of the biggest producers in Hollywood right now, and it's great, it's wonderful. If anyone's going to get it done, they are. But having learned these lessons along the way, I don't take anything for granted, and I don't assume that things are going to happen just because you have really powerful people involved, because it's a very difficult business to succeed in. And so that was just, I think, just a learning lesson along the way. And it was obviously a very thrilling time to be working with a big movie star one-on-one like that, and to be embraced by a studio, and to sort of begin and plant a flag, if you will, of who we were and what we were about, so that from that point forward, people that were maybe looking to hire us or throw assignment work our way, we started to sort of develop a voice and a sort of, we were kind of, at one point we were known as the supernatural guys. we would get every supernatural script you could imagine. And I didn't mind it because I love supernatural, and I love the questions of the beyond, and finding a way to conceptually dramatize those in a way that's cinematic and fun and exciting.
So you weren't necessarily that green where you hadn't seen the ups and downs of Hollywood, and you hadn't moved yet. You were still living in Los Angeles?
Yes, I was still in LA. I didn't move back home until at least 12 years into my journey, if you will, to try and make it. And but at that point, I was able to move home because I didn't need to be in LA anymore. I could fly in for meetings. I could video conference with my partner. You know, we used to sit at a coffee shop every day and do our work, and then it just changed and was over a TV screen. But the same work was being accomplished, and I was able to fly down for meetings. But no, for me, that early going, when I first, at I think 25 years old, sold that script that my boss set up at Disney, that was that moment, and it was really profound. And I tell people, this is actually a story that resonates, and when people that are struggling and trying to make it, I always tell them this story, and it was about the script Dragonfly. So we wrote this script. It was the first one that felt like, okay, this is pretty good. We might actually have a voice. We might actually know what we're doing. And so, but we didn't have an agent at the time, and we were really sort of green and had no connections. So we needed to find an agent. So what we did was we researched Variety, we researched Hollywood Reporter. Every day there's a spec sale, you know, somebody's selling something, and there's an agent's name mentioned, and so we write all that down and keep lists and start noticing who the agents were that were selling a lot of spec scripts, the ones that were selling ones that were like what we had written. And by the time we were done, we had about 30 names. And so we just started cold calling and saying, you know, you don't know us, but we've got this great script. And I would say probably, 30% never returned the call. Of those that we actually spoke to, probably half said, I don't take unsolicited material, no thank you. So that left, maybe 15 that accepted the script. And then out of those 15, probably half never ever bothered to call back. And of the half that did, they all passed. So what is that? That's 29 passes. But then we got one call from this guy at a boutique agency who said, I love it. Come in. Let's sit down and talk about it. So we went in and met with this guy, agent. He had one or two tiny little notes, but otherwise he got it. He loved it. He says, let's try and sell this thing. So the following Tuesday, because that's how it was done in the 90s when there was the spec boom, he went out to 25 producers that all had deals at studios, and immediately a lot of producers loved the script, and they all took it into their corresponding studios to see if they could get them to buy it for them. And so over the course of the next 48, 72 hours, one studio after another, they're all passing. And you just get these calls all day long, these heartbreaking, Paramount passed, Warner Bros. Passed, Universal passed, and you start to see it gaining momentum, and you start thinking, oh, this is not going to sell. And then you go through the whole trauma of, so it was all for nothing. We just spent all these months writing this for nothing, and it used to happen so fast in those days. Literally within 48, 72 hours, you would go out with it and know if you sold it or didn't. And because executives would read it at their desk at lunch, that's how things used to work. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we get the call that United Artists wants to buy it. And they bought it for, I think, $400,000 against $750,000. And just like that, the movie was set up, and it later became a produced movie with Kevin Costner. But I always tell that story because it literally, those 29 agents that either never called back or passed or what have you, they all missed the commission on that. They were all wrong, or they were wrong to not bother. all those studios that passed on it and said this is not a movie, there's no movie star that would ever do this, they were all wrong, and they all got it wrong. And it just takes one, you know, it only ever takes one. And that was like one of the most formative lessons that I ever took as a screenwriter in terms of learning the nature of the business and learning how much rejection you have to be able to withstand as long as you can put it in context and understand that it doesn't mean anything. I have no respect for rejection anymore. I just dismiss it. If I believe in an idea and I believe in it passionately and firmly and fervently believe, no, this is really exciting and interesting and people are going to be compelled by this, then I don't care what agents tell me, I don't care what studio executive, I don't care. Just keep going, because all it takes is one. And then once you have that one, the very next day, all the people that passed, they all say, of course, we wanted to bid on that, of course, yes. They all change their tune. They all want you to come in for meetings because they all think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. So that, to me, was sort of one of the most definitive moments in my journey in terms of girding me for the journey ahead, because it has become more and more challenging with new business models and new dynamics, and you really have to sort of get your mind around the idea that it's going to take volume, it's going to take relentlessness, and it's going to take an immunity to rejection.
But you strike me as someone that has thick skin, that doesn't, you're not going to be pushed around, and you've developed sort of a good head on your shoulders and a toughness. Was this always the way, or sort of these moments hazed you?
100%, yeah. No, I had a partner who I still work with on occasion, and he came from a lineage, his father created the beloved dog Benji. And so his father came out to Hollywood with a script, and Hollywood, shooed him away with that nonsense. And so he went back to Texas and said, well, to hell with it. I'm going to raise the money and make this thing myself. He came from the ad world. So he was empowered, and he just decided to make this thing. One of the first independent filmmakers ever, certainly to do what he did next, which was take that film back out to Hollywood and say, what do you think? Would you like to distribute my film? They all poo-pooed him. They all dismissed him, shooed him away. So he went back to Texas and said, well, to hell with that. I'm just going to distribute it myself. So he raised the money and put it in one theater. And of course, because he believed in it, it was a huge hit. And that gave him enough money to open it in a second and a third. So my partner was raised watching this. And so he had that sort of entrepreneurial spirit and fearlessness that I did not. My dad was a company man. So I watched my dad come in the door wearing a suit, the monkey suit from working for the man all day. So I wasn't necessarily entrepreneurial by nature. So I learned a lot of that from my partner. And then, as you say, as you go through the process of these learning points along the way, that's what girds you, and that's what sort of prepares you for the long journey. I've been doing this since I was, the actual writing and selling scripts since I was 25. And so I've been at it for 30 years now, and selling pitches and scripts and TV pilots year in and year out. There's been different business models that have come that I've had to adapt to and adjust to. I've left partnerships and had to do it on my own, taken on new partnerships, all kinds of different, incarnations along the way. But there's certain things that remain the same and hold true, which is you will never ever fail if you never quit. You're only guaranteed to fail if you quit. And it's going to be incredibly difficult, and you have to believe in your ideas, and you have to, now more than ever, I'm learning.
If you are enjoying Mike's insights into screenwriting, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. We invite you to reflect on this statement. When you ask the right questions, the story almost writes itself. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Going back to you, Mike, what were you learning?
I used to rely on my agents and managers quite a bit. And I would wait for them to call with opportunities and with responses and what have you. And part of that was because I was never felt comfortable with self-promotion. But it's become a new world, and everybody has a website, and everybody's reachable. And collaboration is possible in a way that it didn't used to be. You can reach out to people, and the next thing you know, you're collaborating on a concept where in the old days, you wouldn't even know how to reach them, let alone, communicate with each other. So what I'm discovering now that's important for writers, perhaps more than ever, is to literally, take things into their own hands and network and reach out, especially since agents and managers have sort of, in the last several years, they've started to do less and less and less. I find that, I used to have an agent where we talked every day, spitballing ideas. He would know the pulse of the industry. He would have know who wanted what, and we'd develop a plan and go execute that thing. And it was just a very vital and kinetic relationship where good ideas could come from that dialogue that we had every day. And now I find that agents don't even really want to hear from you much. They basically, they'll take your script out and let you know if there's an offer on it. But otherwise, they certainly don't want to plan any strategy with you, and they really don't care about creative discussions that much either. So that's where managers have sort of crept in to fill that role a little bit, to have that day-to-day contact with writers. Because we do live a very solitary life sometimes. We're sort of operating out of a writer's cave, if you will. And it's nice to be able to speak to somebody who's having the power lunches, who's in the meetings at the lots, and who's well-versed in exactly what's going on, the trends, the slates, and what everybody's looking for, and how to sort of creatively train your mind and creative spirit onto what's going on. And so managers have sort of filled that space a little bit. But even so, I find that there's a lot of times where agents and managers are just simply afraid. Oftentimes they will be negative or dismissive of ideas because they don't quite get it, or they can't quite put it in a box, because these people work in a very fast-paced, environment, and they need to know very quickly what's the genre, who is there, the star role, is there IP, is there a way I can market it? And if they can't check all these boxes, regardless of what creative genius you may think you've put into this idea that was divine to you by God or the universe, they're not looking at it that way. They're looking about whether there's enough boxes checked that they can get on the phone and convince somebody that there's enough boxes checked. And so that can be frustrating, because what you're looking for is somebody who sees your heart. You put your heart on the line, hopefully. You've invested something of yourself into this creative effort. And you want somebody to tell you, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. You did wonderful work here. I think people are going to want to see that. I think people are going to be compelled by the imagery and the words and what you've done here. Now, that's a very flowery description of what every writer probably wants, and you rarely will ever get that from any representative in the history of the world. But it's true. You're an artist, and you're trying to create something for people. You want to move them. You want to touch them. I know that I do. That's why I'm passionate about it, because I want to move people, and I want to make them feel something. So you wish that you had that relationship with your representatives. A lot of times you don't. So then what do? You have to take it upon yourself to go out into the world. I'm doing it right now, actually, with a faith-based project that I have. Very small movie. It's a technically, I would call it an indie, and you could probably make it for $1 million, a couple $1 million, but it's clearly a faith-based movie in respect that it's about a man going, he's wandering through the valley of the shadow of death, and he is really in it, and he comes out the other side having been reborn, if you will, in a sense. So I realized, I've never done this before, but why don't I just try and reach out to the faith-based indie community and see if I can do this thing on my own? Because, agents and managers, they don't know what to do with that thing, right? So I started reaching out to people, and lo and behold, they're responding to me. And I'm realizing, you know, I should have been doing this a long time ago. I should have been the one fighting for my own material. I believe in it. Why should I just let it sit on a shelf because some agent or manager told me that they don't know what to do with it? And so the wonderful thing about the way the world is expanding with the social media platforms and the internet and what you guys are doing here is that we all have a way of reaching out to each other now and collaborating and finding partners, finding people that can help us do what we all want to do. So it's an exciting time in that respect. And then, without belaboring the point, I'm also excited about the fact that it looks like specs might be on the comeback. Seems like there's a business model changing that could be very exciting for writers as well.
And there's platforms for faith-based material that
Yes.
maybe previously there were only just a few networks, and now there's so many.
Yes, that's the wonderful thing about it is there's a lot more places to go, and if there's anything I've learned as well about this business is that it is a volume game. As I mentioned earlier about all that rejection, the same goes for not necessarily rejection, but just sometimes people, you know, they already have something similar, or there's one reason or another, but it doesn't mean they don't love your material. They just aren't the ones to make it. And you have to learn how to not take that personally, you know. You have to understand this is a business and there's different reasons that people perhaps might not want to move forward with you on a project. And so all that means is you just have to find the person or entity that is right for you by continuing the search, continuing to put yourself out there, continuing the outreach, and just keep going. You know, is the bottom line. You just have to keep going.
Mike, on your website, you have something about 7 Logline essentials.
Right.
Where if a writer reaches out to you, you will send them sort of a free template and email them back some thoughts.
Yeah.
Can we talk more about this?
Yeah. Well, I have there's 2 things I offer that are sort of the invitation to the person who comes to my consulting website, which is one is idea vetting, because and I ask them to submit their idea to me, but use my 7 Logline essentials. And what a logline is, for those that don't know, is it's basically a 1-sentence summarization of your script idea. But what it's really trying to do is show us what the central concept is and the central conflict that the hero is going to be facing, and what's at stake and what are the antagonistic forces that they're facing. And all of that has to come in 1 sentence. And basically its purpose is to convince people to read your script, really. I use it for 2 reasons. Number 1, I write a logline of every script that I'm going to write before I write it. And what it helps me do is, number 1, put in a very succinct way what it is that I'm setting out to do, so that when I'm writing and I get lost in the weeds of Act 2 or something, I can always come back to it and see what my intention was and see perhaps where I've lost my way, because the logline is the North Star. It tells us exactly what this is, where we're going, and what we should expect. So it's creative for me on that respect. I also use it as a vetting mechanism because I like to test my ideas out on people that I can trust. I don't just come up with an idea and go secretly to my closet and write it. No, you should be unafraid of your idea. You should be unafraid to test it with as many people. Test it with the gardener, test it with somebody in the elevator, it doesn't matter. But use your logline as a way to test your idea. What do you think of this? And you just give them, it takes 30 seconds out of their day to either go, oh, or huh? And, you know, based on the responses you get, you know whether you're onto something, right? So it's good for that. I call that idea vetting, right? And so the idea is obviously the most critical component of selling a screenplay to a Hollywood studio. I mean, it's more important than the dialogue, it's more important than the characters, it's more important than the themes, it's more important than your excellence in crafting scenes. Because all of those things amount to nothing if the concept is not marketable and appeals to the masses. If it doesn't have some quality that is so profoundly evocative that captures your imagination, that's why somebody, they spend a lot of money buying these scripts and then putting millions of dollars into these budgets to make these movies. it's not a small thing. It's a big enterprise. You got to think that you're basically going into business with these studios to create something, right? And so you damn well better be delivering them something that is incredibly fresh and interesting and compelling. And so the idea is king. And so what I do on my website is I offer a vetting service where people can literally send me their log line, and then I'll tell them whether I think it's commercially viable or not. And if it's close to it, I'll tell them maybe some things they can adjust and how they can get it there. And if it's nowhere near, I'll tell them that too. And maybe don't waste your time on that and go back to the drawing board. But the log line is a way of conveying that idea. And there's some really important components to it that I've learned over the years. Everybody has a different view of how a log line can and should be constructed, but I know what works for me. And I've been doing this for a while, and so I sort of have a number of elements that are important to me. One of them, of course, is the purpose of the log line, which is to use as a selling tool. At the end of the day, you want your agent or manager who's going to be talking to studio executives to correctly communicate what it is that he wants to send over, right? And so sometimes you don't necessarily fully trust your agent or manager to convey it the way you want it conveyed. So if you craft a log line for them to use, then you've already put your best foot forward because you know it's got your stamp on it of how it will be communicated over the phone or via email or what have you. So as a selling tool, this is your last chance, because once that script goes into a studio, some reader, some story analyst is going to do coverage on it. They're going to write their own log line, and you just best hope at that point that it's, conveys what you had in mind. But in the early going, you're basically trying to come up with a way that you can test your idea, and then you're using it as a sales tool for your agents to use. But the elements that are important are obviously the protagonist. You want to convey early in a log line who this could be as an actor. Because the representatives, the studio executives, the folks that will be reading this log line, that's one of the first things they think is there a role for a movie star? Because sometimes, like for example, let's say you wrote this $150 million tentpole sci-fi movie, an original idea of your own, and your hero is a 16-year-old girl. Well, that might make for an interesting screenplay, but there are no A-list 16-year-old movie stars. They don't exist. So you cannot put in the lap of a studio executive a project that he or she cannot market because there's no role for a movie star in it. So you have to think that stuff through. So it's very important that when you create your protagonist, that you have casting in mind, because at the end of the day, you're trying to sell this thing. So you want them to be able to envision the movie that they will market before they even contemplate buying your script. Also, I think it's important to talk about world. World is more important nowadays than ever, with the entree of all the Marvel movies or Black Mirror on television or Game of Thrones. It's become an essential part of a lot of storytelling is a sense of world, where you literally create a time and place with characters and backstories and mythologies and all of these things that suggest to a buyer, once again, we're trying to sell a script, there could be opportunities for spin-offs, for franchises, for secondary characters, and all of these things, because there's a world. And once you've planted the seed in their mind that there's a world to your screenplay, then they are more inclined to see the opportunities, which is what they're here to do, is make money, right? And sell product, sell content. So we're trying to help them help you, right? And the log line is a way of doing that. Another thing I always think is important is to clearly suggest tone and genre. You don't want anybody to be reading your log line and thinking that your stark drama is actually a comedy, or vice versa. And the words you choose are critical in that, right? Because if you, like I always say, if it's an action vehicle, you want to talk about a heist or an operation or what have you. But if it's a comedy that has similar things going on, you might talk about hijinks or antics, right? Totally different words that convey the same thing, but it's clear. This is a comedy. This is an action movie. So your words are critical to how you convey what you're trying to say. and I just take people through. There's a number of elements that I believe are important to get it just right, and if they check it out on the website, it's all there for free. They can try and implement that into their own log lines.
Yeah, you have a very nice website.
Oh, thank you.
And you seem like a straight shooter. Do you think that maybe some of that has come from people not telling you the truth in the past, and you want to be able to? There's ways of delivering truth to people without harming them. Is that something that's important?
I am who I am. I was raised by two wonderful parents who just raised me. They're good people, and I try to be a good person. Honesty is all I know. I'm honest to a fault. Sometimes it gets me into trouble because I can't not just speak what I think and feel. So it was a bit of a shock to me to arrive in Hollywood and discover how many damaged people there are. And damaged people lie and cheat and steal. And there's a lot of that goes on. And so it becomes tricky when you're collaborating with people trying earnestly to achieve some sort of creative improvement, right? Like I'll be the first person on any script to say, give me your notes. I'll take all the notes in the world. And if they make it better, wonderful for all of us, because we're doing this together. Wonderful. If they don't make it better, I'll tell you that and I'll explain to you why. And then if you agree, then we'll dismiss that and we'll move on. That to me is just the sort of common sense, logical approach to trying to improve a project, to make it get better. But what I discovered is there's a lot of people with different agendas and different abilities to convey the truth, different personalities. And so you really do have to develop some skills as a sort of retail therapist to navigate some of these waters. There have been certain executives or representatives where you learn very quickly what their temperament is and you learn what their style is. And you learn that you can either butt up against that with your style and your approach and have diminishing returns, or you can start to play the game a little bit and you can start to navigate those waters with an understanding of who you're dealing with and what you might need to do to circumvent some of those personality traits. So I don't like that aspect of it because it makes me uncomfortable, because I am a straight shooter and I'd rather just be direct and improve things and solve problems. But it does become a big part of working in Hollywood, because that's just the nature of some of the personalities you run into.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. How can a screenwriter make the distinction between a Hollywood-ready idea and one that isn't good enough?
Isn't good enough? Well, it's interesting. I always, when I talk to people that are interested in my experience and what I have to offer, I always make it clear up front. Are you trying to write a movie that you want to sell to Hollywood, or are you trying to write a movie that perhaps is indie fare or something else? Because they are completely different animals. And while I have dabbled in indie fare, I did a little independent horror movie years and years ago. It is a world that I am not expert in, but I can tell you how and what you need to do to try and write a script that you will sell to Hollywood for a movie that will hopefully have a wide release in the theaters and be seen by millions of people. That's what I was drawn to, because as a kid, those are the movies I went to, and those are the movies that I'm inspired by, and those are the movies that I tend to write. And so the biggest component in those types of movies, and for people, one of the biggest mistakes I see young writers making is, I had a professor at film school who had a wonderful remark, which was, real life is no excuse for bad drama. And what he meant by that was that we all live our lives, and sometimes it's filled with dramatic moments and conflict and crazy stories and what have you. And because they happen to us, they feel particularly compelling, and we think the whole world is going to find this just as exciting and relatable and amazing and have their mind blown just as we were. But the reality is that more often than not, it's because they're our own personal story that they feel that way. And that more likely, where I think we should bring our authenticity into writing is because we listen to the way people talk and we observe and we see things in our own lives. You can bring all of that to your dialogue, to your characterizations. Maybe you know somebody that you want to bring out in a character, or the way somebody talked, or the way somebody dressed. All of that is great. But when it comes to that conceptual idea, I generally advocate that let's leave that one to the universe, to the gods. Go take your hike through the woods or your drive down the highway, listening to your music, and let that come to you. Let that big idea come to you. Be inspired by something. And then really test that out. Make sure that if you come up, and it's lightning in a bottle, admittedly. I mean, it's easier said than done. I mean, it's very difficult to sell a Hollywood screenplay, and part of the reason for that is that these ideas that are compelling to people really are lightning in a bottle sometimes. And so it should really wow you. It should stick with you. It should move you. I always say it should move you emotionally, and it should stimulate you intellectually. And if it doesn't, then move on. Just cast it aside, or take something from it and keep going. But when you've got it and you finally arrived at a concept, that aha moment, it should be really simple but really fresh, and at the same time it should involve a character that's going through something primal. I always try to bring back the idea that if I'm going to be, I remember I did this movie with Robert Zemeckis, and we sold this pitch to Warner Brothers, and so I would go have meetings with him, and he would tell me how he wrote Back to the Future, and one of the great screenplays of all time. And with him, his technique was very simple. He just said, and he was applying it to the script we were working on. He said, you just got to never let the air out of the balloon, right? So for 110 pages or whatever it is, you can never let the air out of the balloon. And what he means by that is that every scene has got to cause the next scene, which causes the next scene. There is no room for any flabby exposition. There's no room for any, pretty casual discussions about the weather. That what really keeps a reader engaged and keeps audiences engaged is they feel like they're on a ride. And that could be a drama, a comedy, or an action thriller. It doesn't really matter. And so that to me is most easily achieved through a primal drive. So it's a mom that's trying to rescue her child, or a man who's trying to save his beloved, whatever it is. But it's primal. It's the most basic thing that we can all relate to, caveman, mentality. And that way you have really simple stakes. The stakes are horrendous. Even a movie like say Deep Impact or Armageddon. Well, this is a very broad example, but the stakes couldn't be more clear. Everyone's going to die, right? It's very primal. And so as you go off on this action adventure movie trying to create the means of blowing up the asteroid and saving humanity, those stakes they're not going anywhere. They're primal. They are big, and they are something we can all relate to. We can all imagine what it would be like to sit in horror wondering if our betters are going to solve the problem of the asteroid and save our lives, right? So it's that relatability of a big idea, the relatability of primal stakes and a primal journey that the main character is going on. And then for me, I'm always partial to a little bit of magic, I love to pose questions for which there are not exactly concrete answers. Because I think if we know the answers, we're so familiar with some sort of genre, story that's been told 1,000 times, we recognize it pretty quickly. And since we know the answer, then we're sort of impatiently just watching to see how you're going about getting us there. Whereas if you leave room that's why I tend to have, I think, written a lot of supernatural stuff, because I've been a bit of an agnostic a lot of my life, searching for answers. And that's the ultimate question, right? What happens after? And if you can sort of pose some questions and maybe suggest at some possible answers, but they're not certain and no one knows for sure, then it allows the audience to sort of put their own interpretation on things. It gets them questioning things themselves. And then now you suddenly engaged people because you're asking questions that don't necessarily have clear answers. So I find that to be sort of, when I'm writing, it helps drive me, because I myself am curious about what the ways those answers might manifest, and ways to playfully tease the audience and see if they can catch it and see what I'm trying to say.
And just as a side note, do you think Benji would have been successful today?
Well, it's funny because my former partner recently did a remake of it for Netflix, and I think it did pretty well. But the difference is, nowadays, it's on a streamer, and it's interesting because everything is sort of finding its place now, and certain genres are being relegated to streamers, and others are still having a theatrical. Like, for example, horror still is a leading theatrical release, and they will take that chance because there's example after example after example of sometimes even obscure indie horror movies that do big business, and because they can be made for a price, they work theatrically. And so you're still seeing theatrical work for horror. They're obviously still doing a lot of the comic book stuff, but that's starting to change. One of the things I was alluding to earlier that I'm excited about is streaming has created this massive data dump, right? And Netflix and Prime and everybody now has their algorithm. So before, they put all the pressure on us screenwriters to type fade out, go get a producer, go get a director, do a bunch of drafts for the director. Maybe a year's gone by and you're now trying to get an actor, a movie star on board. The movie stars already have a stack this high of $20 million offers. By the time they get to yours that's just asking them to attach, months go by. And you need about 10 of these offers to maybe get one. So you could take 2-3 years trying to put your script in a position that it's packaged to now take it to market. Whereas in the old days, as I was saying, it goes out on a Tuesday, I know on a Friday whether I've sold it or not. Now I have to do the work of the studio executive and put this whole thing together and hope that it comes together so I can try to sell it. And that has been the last few years. And it's been really sort of a difficult journey for writers to really find their way in, because it's been incumbent upon them to do so much more than they were ever asked to do. Well, that's changing now, because some of these packages were very expensive. So a Netflix would spend a bunch of money on a big package, and then they, of course, would go make it right away, and it wouldn't do so well. But now they're doing cost cutting because all these streamers have been in growth mode. Now they're being forced to be profitable. It's time to show a profit, right? So they got to do some cost cutting. Well, what's happened is they have an algorithm now that tells them which star is best for their platform and what kind of movie that star should be in, right? So they don't want some package coming to them already laden down with movie stars and directors and whatnot when their algorithm tells them something different. They want to be able to control that now. So what's happening is, and it's been a nice surprise over the last several months, you're seeing spec scripts sell unencumbered, just the script itself, because the streamers know, well, we're going to put our guy that is the algorithm tells us is the right guy or gal to go into this script. So it's kind of come full circle now that they want to put their fingerprints on things again and get back into the studio development business, which is great for writers because now we can start to just sell scripts again and don't have to do all that other legwork that took years.
Can you actually take us through your writing process from start to finish?
Well, it's pretty tried and true at this point. I have to make my creative mind fertile for the ideas to come. There is a certain degree, like you can chase the market, you can read the trades, talk to your agent, your manager, get the feedback. Well, Paramount's looking for thrillers and Warner Brothers wants R-rated comedy. You can do that work. But I have always found that whenever I chase the market, the material suffers because it's not coming from an organic, authentic place to begin with. It's coming from a somewhat craven pursuit of a sale, as opposed to the creation of art that happens to sell, right? So what I try to do in my best self is always go back to the place of creating a fertile, creative mind by going out to nature, taking a long drive, listening to music, whatever, unplugging from no phones, none of that stuff, and just literally getting into that almost hypnotic state where when you're driving, you could literally just forget that 5 minutes passed because you were just completely zoned out. And that is when I believe the best idea. Some people say it's in the shower, the same dynamic of just being almost in a meditative state, whether you bring it on yourself or just happen to accidentally find yourself in that state. That's when I get seeds, little seeds like, corn coming up out of the ground with an engagement ring hanging from it. I don't know what the hell it means, but I know it's cool, and I know there's more to that. So let's tug at that thread. Let's keep tugging. That's why I've always loved having a writing partner, and I've had 2 of them in my life, and I just do my best work when I can have a back and forth. I can say, what about this? There's an engagement ring dangling from a cornfield, whatever. And then even if my partner maybe doesn't run with it, maybe something they say makes me think of something. And so before long, you start to build something. And because you have the experience of being a screenwriter, knowing what elements you need, knowing what structural components, knowing that you need a catalyst, you need an act 1 out, you need a midpoint, you need a climax, all those components that you need. Once you have the organic idea, that thing that's lightning in a bottle, which you can't just force to happen and isn't going to happen every day, every week, every month, you might get one of those a year. I say every screenwriter that's, trying to make it, you got to write 3 to 4 specs a year, and you got to be prolific and relentless. So that's asking for 3 to 4 lightning in a bottles a year, And so you've got to put yourself in a position for that to happen. And let's say you get that idea, then you just start working it and using the components that you know that you need. And that's where it becomes almost more like a math problem, because screenplay structure, I usually rely on Save the Cat, which is a really wonderful book and has a great structure that to this day I still use a lot of what's in that book, because it's just very simple, and it lays out when, where, and what you're going to need, and what marks you should be hitting, if you will. So at that point, it's almost a math problem, and your creative mind is trying to fulfill the needs of the structure. And then pretty soon, if you've really stayed true to the authenticity, the other thing that's important is authenticity. And for example, depending on the world you're writing in or the character that you're writing, you want it to sound real, and you want it to be a realistic and authentic experience, not just the way people talk, but the kind of things they would do and how they would do it and what it looks like. And the more authentic you are, the more the storytelling almost tells itself, because you're being so true to reality. So I recently had an idea about a war correspondent. I just knew that there was something in that world that I wanted to tell, but I didn't want to tell it at war. I wanted to tell it here in America, where the correspondent had come back. And I didn't know anything about this world. So before writing, I just had the sheer luck of a friend of mine's cousin was one of the top war correspondents on cable news. And he gave me his number. I called him up, and we interviewed this guy for hours and hours and hours, and he was just gold. And we're just furiously scribbling every word he said. And literally through that research, I had all the dialogue. Here was just an example, and we put it in the script. He said, when you're riding in a car in a war zone, you take out a grease pencil and you put your blood type on the window. And the reason is, if you get blown up in a bottleneck, which is what they try to do, they try to blow up the car up in the middle and then create a bottleneck that none of the others can pass and then kill everyone, right? He says, well, the guys coming behind, the medics that are going to save your life, they need to know what blood type you are to give you blood. And that's how they can tell, because it's written on the window. Now, how would Mike from Seattle ever know this or ever be able to put that authenticity into a script? Well, you got to do the research. You've got to, reach out to people, find people, communicate with people. And with that authenticity, when the reader is reading that, they know they're in the hands of somebody that is a serious writer. This person has done the work to put me into a world I know nothing about, but it feels real and it feels authentic. And now you've really engaged them, and they care more about the character. And so the research that goes into being authentic, I think, is another really important part of it, because it just elevates the character off the page if it reads like somebody that actually exists in a world. So then I write, and I try to write 5 pages a day. I like to get a script done in 6 weeks or less. And the reason for that is that, first of all, I'm a writer, so you get up and you write. I have a set time. It's the same time every day. It's the same amount of time every day. And I think that's important, because what it does is I start the day by reading the previous day's work, and I'm plugged back into what I did. I'm getting creative juices flowing, and now let's take it a little bit further down the road. And by the time you get through, 110, 120 pages, whatever you're doing, it has a cohesion to it that it was part of the other thing too is you're going through stuff in your life. You may be going through a divorce, or you just had a new baby, or who knows what in your life. And the energy and the emotions that you have going on in your life are finding their way into that screenplay. And so there's a little bit of a snapshot in time and into yourself. That's what you give it. That's why people say you're putting your heart into it, because you're sharing aspects of what you're going through in this piece of art that you're trying to create. And it's there, it's on the page. You might steal a piece of dialogue that you just had from your fight with your wife who you're divorcing, or what have you. Or you might, as I often find, take a sweet piece of dialogue that your child said at bedtime, and that perfectly finds its way into the script, because the innocence of their own dialogue is better than anything you could have come up with, right? So those elements are what give it that emotional resonance, as if you're honest and put your experience, what you're feeling, into the script at the time, and finish it quickly. That's why I say finish it quickly, because if you take a year to write a screenplay, you're dipping in and out. You don't even remember what you wrote last month, and now you're trying to play catch up. There's a logical aspect to that where you're forgetting things. I mean, there's an aspect to screenwriting that is not unlike a puzzle, or like one of those 1,000-piece puzzles, right? And you have to know where every puzzle piece goes and remember it, because it's going to come back over here, and you need to be aware of that. So if you step away from it for too long, you're losing that edge that you need to have, so that you can constantly be calling back dialogue, calling back, character points that you made earlier, and story beats, and things that give it a fullness that connects it all in the end and makes the reader feel like they've been on a journey and not just, connected scenes, but rather it's all interconnected. So I try to write it quickly, and I'm not a big rewriter. I tend to, as I said, I read the day's work from before, I edit and try to improve it, and then I start the next day's work. And by the time I get to the end, I'm kind of done, unless it's one of those scripts that's not that great. And it was probably because it wasn't conceived that well from the beginning. 2 reasons I might write a script that's not that great. I didn't get the concept quite right from the beginning, and didn't quite get the stakes or the primal drive or something about it that would have been more simple or more clear. And it ends up being a little bit muddy, and it's hard to fix that. The other reason would be that I just kind of did not demand of myself the creative originality to take the time to feel something and try and find a way to express it that hasn't been done before, or that moves me because it's touching a part of me that I've been experiencing lately. Those are the scripts where it might read fine because I'm a professional writer and I know how to write something, but you don't feel anything because maybe I didn't feel anything writing it. And I always regret writing scripts like that, because there is so much time that you put into these things, plotting these things and putting the work in and writing them. That's why it's so critical that you feel something when you conceive it and when you write it every day. I always say, if I don't cry a little bit at some point in the script, throw it out, because it needs to move you. And if it doesn't move me, it's not going to move anyone else, right? So that's pretty much it. I usually try to conceive the idea and have it cranked out within 6 weeks. I can outline pretty quick now. I got that down to about a week to 10 days to outline the whole thing. And then writing is the fun part. That's where you just power through. You enjoy writing those scenes and figuring out ways to convey ideas in the most elegant way that doesn't feel expositional and drives your ideas and themes forward. And yeah.
How does a screenwriter ruin the first 10 pages of their screenplay?
Well, more than ever. It used to be you would get an act, right? So your script would go out to the executives across town, and some executive would read it over lunch, and by the end of Act 1 on page 25, they know whether they're buying the script or not, or advocating to their boss to buy the script, or advocating to the studio to buy the script. So you got 25 pages, luxurious. You can play out your whole concept, play out your character, your hero, and then off on the hero's journey they go. It's a luxurious 25 pages. Well, what's happened is with the advent of streaming, people don't give a movie or TV show that much time. They're sitting on their couch, they turn it on, and they know within a few minutes if they're watching this thing or not. And oftentimes it's no, click out. And the streamers are noting all of this. So they know that they don't have the luxury of 25 pages to have, or 25 minutes to have their viewer try something out. So then they apply that same standard to themselves. Well, you need to get me within the first 10 pages. And some people even advocate it's down to like 1 to 3 at this point. But you have to capture their attention. You have to capture them with a concept and with something fresh, something that they haven't seen before. And you have to do it quickly. Now, the trick is you don't want to completely blow out, your beginning, middle, and end. You don't want to give away your ending. You don't want to, you want to be able to, as writers and artists, you want to be able to slowly percolate these things and develop them and give them time. So you have to be clever about how you do it. And oftentimes, sometimes what people do is they'll use like a flashback, or they'll use something that is a scene that's going to be happening later and just give us a tidbit of it so that we feel and absorb the concept, but now you're going to start the story from here. So we know what's coming, and at least we can anticipate that. Those have become almost tropes at this point, using those techniques. So I tend to try to avoid those because they are so familiar as techniques nowadays. And I try to find different ways in, but it is critical that you convey your concept certainly within the first 10 pages, and that you also do your best work. If you're going to hand over a 120-page script to somebody, there's going to be parts of it that you read and go, oh, that's the scene, right? Boy, I really outdid myself there. Well, wherever you should be saying that is the first 10 pages. And you should take the time to hone that and work on that and make sure that the characterizations are there, that the concept is there, that the dialogue is there, and that the originality is there, because they really, truly are not making it beyond 10 pages anymore because of the way that viewers aren't making it past 10 minutes anymore. And so the onus is on us to come up with a way to engage people, but at the same time, hopefully not completely give it all away and have nowhere to return from because we've blown our load all the way out of the first shot.
Sure, and the days of sort of family sitting around the TV watching 8 is enough, and it slowly starts to happen are gone, and now we're on our computer doing other things and multitasking.
Right, multitasking, all that stuff. It's definitely it is the challenge of streamers, and it's created more places to go with material, but it is a different kind of viewing experience, and I think part of that's why the TV binging seems to be almost a better fit for streaming, because you have episodes and you can stop if you want and come back to it, and you still have the ability to sort of tell isolated episodes that are part of a larger whole. Whereas a movie, it is the thing, and you have to go through the whole thing. And if you stop in the middle of movies and come back, it kind of ruins the experience, and so it's trickier in streaming with the features.
You now work with screenwriters as a script consultant and story sort of analyst.
Yeah.
What common mistakes are you seeing?
Well, I think usually it has to do with, and it always comes back to this, which is grasping what is a mass appeal concept and what is a mass appeal idea. And again, that's why I always say to people, look, if you want to write a story about a family, having a crisis over a Christmas holiday or something, that's great, and you should. But that's not going to be a spec sale to a Hollywood studio, because that's not a big enough idea. That's not a big enough concept. That's not a mass appeal idea. And so that's why I always delineate, because I don't mean to diminish any idea. Some of the most incredible movies are the tiniest of stories. It's just that if you want to sell a screenplay to Hollywood, a spec script to Hollywood, you have to meet certain criteria. And part of that criteria is that there has to be a very high concept idea, a very big, fresh, innovative idea that a huge movie star could have a primal experience confronting and carrying out. So a lot of the log lines that I read just don't quite hit that mark. And it's just sort of it takes time to learn what that is. And that's why I encourage people, the best way to it's like a film school education. You should go and read the trades every day, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, and look at what sells and read what the concept was. If you do that every day, you'll start to see consistent qualities that they have, consistent themes. You should also go on the internet and try and get your hands on every screenplay you possibly can, whether it's been produced, whether it's just a spec sale that sold at one point. You can get those from, agents and managers and whatnot. But the more you read screenplays, the more you start to grasp what those big ideas look like. And sometimes I find that when I read screenplays of like some big spec sale or something, I'm inspired by an idea of my own. Like I'll see a little piece in their script that they just stepped over and didn't think anything of, and I'll be like, there's something to that. And so I get inspired by other people's screenplays. And so it is only by having the experience of doing the research on a daily basis to see what the marketplace is elevating as worthy of a spec sale, and then reading those scripts and reading the movies that they get turned into and seeing the ideas over and over and over. And over time, it's like I started out working for a couple of huge producers. And so my job as an assistant often was to read these scripts that came across the desk. And I read countless scripts. So I developed very early in my Hollywood experience an understanding of what a high concept idea, what a big spec sale idea required, what it consisted of. And that just, I think a lot of that comes from exposing yourself to it and just really digging deep into all those elements to understand what it is.
Well, if I may play devil's advocate for a moment, you say maybe a family story around Christmas of a family sort of in crisis. If we take Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, well, it was a family sort of in crisis waiting for dad to come home.
It's a wonderful movie. It would never get made today. Never.
You don't think so?
Well, let's put it this way. It would never sell as a spec today.
Okay.
Because there's just it's too earnest. There's not enough hijinks for some star to make a buffoon of himself. There's not enough conceptually going on there, which is a shame. Like a bunch of the things that I sold in the past would never sell now. And it's just because they came from an era where there was a willingness to develop ideas. And so I'm hoping that we're returning to that. And it would be wonderful if we are. But there it is. So a lot of people point to some movies that have gotten made in the past and say, well, see, isn't this proof that you can get away with this? But the path that some movies get there, let's say John Hughes says I'm doing this, well, that's why. It's not because it's a spec sale from Joe in Kansas that he sold one day, it's another reason that something made it to the screen. And so that's why I tend to be particularly harsh in my assessment of what is a viable spec sale idea, because it is a very, very small window of possibility, and it usually has some very clear parameters as to why.
How is the spec script market different today than it was in the 90s or early 2000s?
Well, that's part of that sort of progression I was laying out before. There used to be large development budgets at the studios. They used to be populated by people who wanted to put movies together and develop movies, so they would buy scripts by the dozens. Each studio would buy dozens of scripts, and then they would develop them. They would say, this would be a great filmmaker. We should go after this person. And they would, one of them would percolate to the top. It would get its director, get its stars, and be ready to, and that's the one they would make. And the others that never made it might make it later, or might just never make it, And that was the nature of why there was that boom, because there was the money available to these studios, these development budgets, to take chances on things. And then as we progressed into the packaging realm, where the screenwriter suddenly had to become the studio executive and had to put together all the pieces and literally, play the part of studio executive before they were even in a position to sell their script, that's when things started to become part of this realignment and the advent of streaming and how, the spec sale became more difficult than ever. And now we're seeing a return, again, because of the technology, we're seeing a return to hopefully the idea of just the original screenplay selling without being encumbered by, elements, actors, directors, because now the streamers, armed with their algorithm, they want to put their own fingerprints on it with an exactitude that they know they can apply, almost like they think they're going to have a math problem here to solve. And that's fine with me, because it means they're just now willing to buy scripts without having to do all that other legwork. So I think it's a good time to be a screenwriter right now. It's a good time for original ideas. I think the fact that we've seen the Marvel franchises start to sort of dwindle away, and people are getting sort of exhausted by the superhero worlds, if you will. It's opening a door. And as I always say, there's never, I don't think, ever going to be a time where people are not going to want to sit in a dark room and watch movies with other people. I think that will be something culturally that will always exist. And people are always going to want movies and TV shows. There's an appetite for it. We want to escape our lives. We want to be transported somewhere else. So I just think that there's constantly changes in the business models, but as I always say, a good script finds its way. If you can write an inspired, good script and never give up on it, I can almost guarantee you that it's going to find its way.
I believe you posted on your website and also maybe LinkedIn the anatomy of a script sale.
Yes.
And some of the what you call the nitty gritty behind it, and then some of the fallacies that so many of us think that we can do this and then we'll sell this amazing thing that we heard so much about in the 90s, early 2000s. Can we go through sort of a Reader's Digest version of the anatomy?
What that was referring to was sort of taking people through the headlines and sort of getting behind that into what actually transpires. I remember in some early successes that I had. I have a wonderful group of friends who cheer me on and are all completely oblivious to the way the business works, and all they can rely on is what I would tell them. And so they would have a lot of sort of misconstrued ideas of how it worked. They would think, oh, somebody hands you a briefcase full of cash and away you go to Margaritaville to party your spec sale. But the truth is that you don't actually sell a script for a whole bunch of money and walk away. What's happening is you're being hired to do work on the script. So they buy the rights from you. They now own it. So say goodbye to your control of that forever. But they'll give you a 1, 2, or 3 step deal. And what that means is you're going to do a rewrite of this script because they have notes, or they're going to bring a director on and he's going to have notes or she's going to have notes, and you're going to do a rewrite for them. Maybe you'll do a second rewrite, and maybe you'll do a polish. When you start the rewrite, you get a little piece of your money. And then 8 weeks later, when you turn it in, you get a little piece more of your money. And when you start the second rewrite, weeks or months later, then you get a little piece more of your money. And so it's paid out in these installments based on the work that you do over time. And so what's happened is that the buyers, the studios and streamers, they've tried to reduce the number of steps. It used to be, I remember sometimes there'd be 3 and 4 step deals. And you just have all this work that you're going to be doing and getting paid for over time. Sometimes it would take you a year or more to recoup all the money that you sold the script for. But nowadays what they try to do to save money and not pay writers as much as they just do a one-step deal, so that they can reduce the amount of money that they have to pay the writer. And so then, once you've made the sale, you do one draft. It's also a way of them not being stuck with you, because a lot of times, I remember I had a director on a project. As soon as he came on board, the first thing he did was, I want to fire these writers. And it's funny because we wrote the script that made him want to devote 2 years of his life to make a movie, and yet the first thing he wants to do is fire us. Well, it was another time where I had to learn not to take things personally, because the reason for that is they want to make changes, and they feel as though you probably are very emotionally attached to what you've written, and you're going to resist that, or you're going to struggle to even see it and to be able to figure out how to do it. And so they figure the cleanest way is to just cleave you from the project, bring in another writer who sees it fresh, that they can work with, that has no emotional attachment to it. And so, they like having the flexibility of being able to move on from writers very quickly. So that's another reason for the one-step deal. But that was I think the thrust of that blog post, was just talking about how a spec sale actually works and what are the elements behind it. There were some other aspects, but I can't recall what they were at this point.
If someone wants to write for Hollywood today, what do they need to know?
Well, I think it's important, again, I was alluding to this before, about having a sense of what the appetite, it's a business, right? You're trying to sell something. That's the weird, intersection of art and commerce here. You're trying to create a piece of art from your heart, but you're going to sell it. And so you have to be mindful of your audience, not just the people that might see it one day in the theater, but the buyers, the people that that think they know best about what audiences want, right? So it helps to basically know your world. And that's why I think that any writer starting out needs to read scripts and read the trades every day, so they get an education and so that they get an understanding. I also, it's a lot to ask, but I feel like it was really important for me. I went to LA and I worked for producers, and I lucked into those. I went to like temp agencies where you do a typing test and answer phones, and then they go put you on an agent's desk or producers. It just so happened the day I walked in, one of the biggest producers in Hollywood needed a coffee fetcher number 3. And I went in that night and I got coffee fetcher number 3. And I worked that up to traveling assistant and traveled the world with him and learned how movies get made. And that was an invaluable experience for me, to learn how the business works, have an up-close view of it. And that was before I even started writing screenplays. I still hadn't made that leap yet. But I saw that it's kind of like seeing behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. You discover it's not this magical world. It's attainable. There are means of attaining it. There's shortcuts. There's people that have certain roles that you need to know. And it's by getting that education, even more than film school, that understanding of how the business works, that you can start to feel the confidence to take a chance on writing something and feeling as though you have a chance. Like, I had to develop that confidence. I couldn't have just sat in an apartment in Kansas City and thought, I'm going to write the great American screenplay and sell it. I had to go through that journey of being exposed to how the business works, being taught by mentors. I was a 22-year-old kid sitting in hotel rooms with Steve Zalian, you know, the writer of Schindler's List and Moneyball, watching him solve a problem in a scene while the producer, you know, gave him ideas. It was just an invaluable experience. And again, dumb luck that I was even in that position. But those are the kinds of building blocks to get yourself in a position to then and read all the scripts you can read and learn about what's going on in the business on a daily basis in the trades, see what's selling, see why, and then at some point you got to start writing, and you got to write every day, and you got to be a real writer. And that doesn't mean you can't have a job. I wrote my first spec script from 6 p.m. to midnight every night after working a full day's job, because that's what you have to do, you know. And if you're smart, your full day's job will be in the business, so you're not wasting it, you know, doing something unrelated to the movie business, and it's all synergistic, and you're just learning and grinding and learning. It takes time, you know, and it's a process, but it can be done. I'm just some guy from Seattle, learned this craft, I call it. Yes, there's an art to it, but it's a craft that I have learned over time and been, you know, somewhat successful at figuring out how to sell my wares, if you will.
And lastly, if I may, it sounds like you also learned not to take things too personally. And
Big
that
part
sounds
of
like
it.
a major
That's,
thing.
you know, I've been growing up in this business, and a big part of, for me, growing up has been learning not to take things personally and to understand things from the other person's point of view, what they want, what their objective is. Try to see things from the other person's point of view so that you don't internalize everything as some condemnation of your art. And you understand that it's a business and that there is a way for art and business to both coexist. There's a lot of, you know, growing up that's involved in it too. So it's just been a journey. That's why I keep calling it a journey, because it really has been a process for me.